Ukraine's Third Army Corps has launched a massive drone campaign stretching across Luhansk, Starobilsk, Alchevsk, and key logistics corridors feeding Russia's eastern war machine. Cheap Hornet drones with ranges up to 200 kilometers are now bypassing Russian electronic warfare systems using onboard ASI, machine vision, and frequency hopping technology. Even Russia's powerful Pole-21 and Krasukha jamming systems are failing. The result is devastating. Fuel depots exploding, supply convoys burning, ammunition warehouses collapsing, and nearly 590 square kilometers already liberated in 2026. Moscow's biggest nightmare is no longer losing trenches. It is losing control of the invisible systems keeping its entire occupation alive. The most dangerous realization for Moscow was not that Ukraine could strike Luhansk occasionally. It was that Ukraine could now remain there persistently. This is not classic air superiority with fighter jets. It is something more practical and more dangerous: operational dominance. Ukrainian drones are increasingly bypassing Russian electronic warfare, radar networks, and localized air defense systems. Russia's once impenetrable defensive bubble over occupied territory is weakening. Behind the tactical maps and burning supply lines lies an even deeper crisis for Moscow: the psychological breakdown of its frontline soldiers. For the Russian infantrymen in Luhansk, the threat is no longer a distant artillery shell you can hear coming. It is a silent, omnipresent eye hovering directly overhead. Soldiers describe a state of constant paranoia, unable to cook a meal, gather in small groups, or even evacuate their wounded without triggering a precision strike. The sky, which once offered anonymity under the cover of darkness, has been weaponized into a psychological prison. This persistent terror has forced Russia to rely heavily on its famed electronic warfare, EW umbrellas, like the Pole-21 and Krasukha systems. Moscow's doctrine assumed these massive jamming networks would completely blind Ukrainian drone fleets. Instead, a high-tech cat-and-mouse game has emerged. Ukraine is now deploying machine vision AI and frequency hopping software directly onto their Hornet drones. When Russian jamming severs the pilot's radio link, the drone doesn't crash. Its onboard artificial intelligence takes over, navigating autonomously by recognizing terrain and tracking targets visually. The hunter remains on course, entirely immune to electronic interference. By neutralizing Russia's primary technological defense, Ukraine isn't just winning a war of attrition, it is creating a severe tactical paralysis. Russian commanders face an impossible paradox. If they turn off their radar and EW systems, the drones strike at will. If they turn them on, Ukrainian electronic intelligence assets instantly pinpoint their coordinates, converting Russia's multi-million-dollar defense systems into the next target on a drone's hit list. The shield has become the beacon, and under this relentless exposure, the operational friction for the Russian army is reaching a breaking point. The strategic effects are devastating. Ukraine is systematically destroying ammo depots, armored vehicles, fuel reserves, and critical transport routes. In modern war, logistics is the oxygen of any fighting force. Without secure supply lines, even the largest army becomes vulnerable. A military force without secure logistics eventually becomes an army trapped inside its own territory. The pressure is clearest at the Izhvarine border checkpoint, a vital artery connecting Russia directly to its forces in Donbas. By using Luhansk's airspace, Ukraine is now threatening this critical supply route. Ukraine was no longer merely defending Donbas. It was beginning to squeeze the arteries feeding Russia's eastern war machine. The operational geometry of the war is changing, and that transformation is now accelerating through a new doctrine built around one central idea: systemic exhaustion. Modern wars are increasingly decided not by who destroys more tanks, but by who destroys the systems feeding those tanks. At the heart of Ukraine's new strategy are Hornet drones, long-range UAVs, with a striking range of up to 200 kilometers. They are relatively cheap to produce, highly scalable, and designed for persistent deployment. A single cheap drone can now create strategic-level consequences. This terrifies Russia. Moscow has always relied on mass, strategic depth, and enormous logistics networks. Ukraine is now attacking precisely that strength. Ukraine is increasingly fighting not against Russian soldiers directly, but against the ability of Russian soldiers to continue functioning. This approach has been formalized into what Ukrainian forces call logistics lockdown. Ukraine has invested over $110 million into building a systematic, organized logistics warfare doctrine, not random drone attacks, but a deliberate strategy to paralyze the enemy's rear. The operational effects are already visible. Russian commanders are forced to constantly reroute supply convoys, disperse ammunition depots, pull air defense systems backward to protect rear areas, and waste precious manpower guarding logistics nodes that were once considered safe. Russia is increasingly forced to defend everywhere at once. This strategic friction introduces a devastating economic asymmetry that Moscow cannot ignore. While Ukraine's Hornet drones are built primarily from commercial off-the-shelf components costing a few $1,000s, Russia is forced to counter them using multi-million-dollar air defense interceptors. Every Tor, Pantsir, or S-400 missile fired to down a low-cost UAV represents a massive negative return on investment for the Kremlin. This financial and production drain creates a compounding math problem. Russia simply cannot manufacture complex air defense missiles fast enough to match the scaling capacity of Ukraine's automated drone production lines. As long-range drone strikes saturate the airspace over Luhansk nightly, Russian stocks of localized interceptors are being rapidly depleted. Consequently, military commanders are left with an agonizing choice: strip critical protection away from frontline motorized units, or leave high-value strategic targets in the deep rear completely exposed to the next swarm. This is asymmetry weaponized at scale. By forcing Russia to bleed its expensive, finite air defense stockpiles against disposable technology, Ukraine is successfully breaking the economic back of the occupation long before the final ground battles are even fought. This rear area pressure directly creates weakness on the front line. Every destroyed fuel truck or ammunition warehouse means fewer resources reaching the trenches. Ukrainian forces are gaining new localized opportunities for mechanized maneuvers. The battlefield was slowly shifting from a war of trenches into a war of operational exhaustion. According to the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, this sustained pressure is gradually shifting strategic momentum toward Ukraine. What we are witnessing is future warfare evolving in real time. Cheap, smart, persistent systems are challenging traditional heavy armies in ways never seen before at this scale. And this may be the future shape of modern warfare itself. Because increasingly, victory may no longer depend only on capturing territory. It may depend on who can destroy logistics, overload systems, and slowly suffocate the enemy's operational network faster than it can recover. So tell me, do you think drone warfare is permanently changing the balance between massive armies and smaller technologically adaptive forces? But as Ukraine's drone pressure intensifies, the consequences for Russia are becoming increasingly difficult to hide. Occupying territory and controlling territory are no longer the same thing. The sustained Ukrainian drone campaign has made occupied Luhansk an increasingly unstable rear logistics corridor. What was once a relatively safe supply backbone for Russian forces is now under persistent pressure. Disruptions originating in Luhansk are spreading westward, directly undermining Russian operations in Donetsk. This matters because Russian offensives depend entirely on a constant, reliable flow of fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements. When these arteries are disrupted, entire battle plans slow down. Columns are delayed, units run low on critical supplies, and planned assaults lose momentum or are canceled altogether. A military that cannot safely move fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements eventually begins losing initiative even before losing territory. The consequences reach beyond the battlefield. Russia's narrative of full control over Luhansk is steadily losing credibility on the international stage. The visible contradiction between Moscow's claims and ground reality is weakening its diplomatic position. At the same time, Ukraine is gaining valuable political leverage, renewed confidence, and stronger momentum in any future negotiations. Battlefield reality is now actively reshaping diplomatic reality. In 2026, Ukrainian forces have already liberated approximately 590 square kilometers of territory. Around Pokrovsk and other key sectors, Russian units face mounting pressure as their rear area support continues to erode. What began as airspace dominance is gradually converting into tangible land advantages. Russia remains a powerful military with vast resources and manpower. But operational pressure is now accumulating across multiple layers: logistics, air defense, command, and sustainment. The invisible foundations supporting the occupation are beginning to crack. And that may ultimately become the Kremlin's most dangerous long-term problem. The deeper Russia pushes into occupied territory, the more vulnerable its operational system may become. Russia still maintains a clear manpower superiority in several sectors of the front. Thousands of soldiers continue to feed into the meat grinder, allowing Moscow to sustain pressure in multiple directions. Yet this numerical advantage is steadily eroding. The reasons are clear: severe logistics stress, airspace vulnerability, rear area insecurity, and the constant dispersion of resources. Every new kilometer gained requires longer and more exposed supply lines. Every reinforcement column becomes a target. An army may survive manpower losses for years. Sustained logistical paralysis is far harder to survive. Ukraine is not pursuing an instant collapse of Russian forces. Instead, it is executing a grand strategy of progressive exhaustion, slowly draining Russia's ability to sustain large-scale operations through persistent drone pressure and systemic disruption. In this context, Luhansk is undergoing a profound transformation. Once considered a secure rear zone and stable logistics hub, it is rapidly becoming one of Russia's most significant strategic vulnerabilities. The illusion of full control is crumbling from within. If this trend continues, Ukraine may eventually convert its growing airspace dominance into tangible operational breakthroughs on the ground, turning persistent harassment into decisive advances. And if that transformation continues, the consequences may extend far beyond Luhansk itself. And perhaps that is why the battle for Luhansk feels so important tonight. Because this is no longer simply a struggle over territory, it is increasingly a struggle over movement, logistics, operational freedom, and the invisible systems that keep entire armies alive. And if you're still watching this story, it's probably because the battlefield itself is beginning to evolve faster than traditional military doctrine can adapt. And that structural transformation may ultimately reshape the future of the entire Donbas war. The battle for Luhansk may ultimately be remembered as the moment the war began shifting from territorial occupation towards systemic control. It started with the same haunting images we saw at the beginning: silent drones gliding through the night, skies above dark highways in occupied Luhansk, burning supply depots lighting up the horizon, Russian radar screens flickering in confusion, long logistics roads no longer safe, persistent UAV patrols owning the darkness. From that point, the escalation chain became clear. Ukrainian drone dominance led to relentless logistics interdiction. This created unbearable operational pressure. Russian forces became overstretched, their rear areas exposed. The illusion of control weakened, costing Moscow both military momentum and diplomatic strength. Modern wars are increasingly decided not by who holds more trenches, but by who controls logistics, persistent surveillance, mobility, resilience, and airspace. The most important battlefield in modern war may no longer be the trench line itself, but the invisible systems allowing armies to survive behind it. Russia is learning a hard truth: occupying land does not equal strategic control. Ukraine is proving something equally powerful: that smaller, adaptive forces using intelligent systems can slowly destabilize and exhaust much larger military structures. The feeling is unmistakable now. Ukraine is not winning through sudden, massive breakthroughs, but through the steady, relentless accumulation of systemic pressure. Day by day, night by night, initiative is quietly shifting back. And perhaps that is why the skies over Luhansk feel so dangerous tonight. If you want more deep geopolitical documentaries that go beyond headlines and uncover the systems, psychology, and strategic transformations reshaping modern warfare, stay with the channel. Because the next phase of this conflict may not be decided only by territory, it may be decided by who learns to dominate the invisible architecture of war itself. And somewhere above the dark highways of occupied Luhansk, the future shape of 21st century warfare may already be taking form.